And we're now live on YouTube with the February 12th meeting of the Node.js modules team. We have a fairly full agenda and potentially a shorter meeting than normal. So I think we should get right to business. We have a couple upstream issues I think that we should get started with. We have one for disable exports encapsulation for CJS, another for refine and unify exports resolution, error handling. Before we get into both of those, I want to just raise a bug that was found last minute by Jordan earlier today, that apparently self-referential imports is just working on 12.6 with no flag and no warning. This was not intentional. I think that we should try to get a fix together ASAP and push the release team, which really means I would probably do this, but to get a 12.16.1 out ASAP, potentially even today or tomorrow. What are people's thoughts on this?
Do we know if it also affects conditional imports? Because I think both had an unflagging commit in 12.16.
I don't believe that it affects conditionals. Would anyone, I have a pretty busy schedule for the next 2.5 hours or so. Is there anyone who has time that they could take to like quickly test 12 for all the edge cases around flags?
I was just working on the start of a PR. I can try to put something together.
Amazing, thank you, guys. If you can get that PR together in the next couple hours, I can escalate trying to get a release out potentially even tonight.
Sure. My build is just running super slow because these Dell PCs seem to cap their CPU for some reason, but I should be done by the end of this meeting on the build.
Okay, feel free to ping me privately if you want me to spin up a VM, a really beefy VM, and give you an SSH into it.
Thanks. I should be there by the end of this meeting, as I say, but I'll let you know if it's causing issues.
All right, cool. Thanks, anyone. Does anyone have anything else to add on to this one?
Just so that I'm clear, the bug is that it's not flagged. Is that the problem?
Yeah, you're able to like require or import self-referential modules even without including the flag.
Okay, thanks.
No problem. Okay, the next one that we've got is disable exports encapsulation for CJS. Guy, this is yours. Do you want to take it?
So this came up because Preact shipped exports in their package.json, and when they published that, they found that some users were doing things like require Preact/package.json, and those then broke because of exports encapsulation. And then I believe Jason and Miles worked to get a fix into Preact, which includes a mapping for the package.json file and also a root level, like our encapsulation opt-out of /maps to /. And watching this happen, I was just thinking, is this something that's going to happen regularly? Are other packages going to experience that same problem where the upgrade path is going to break for users and then they're opting out of encapsulation? The opt-out is affecting both CommonJS and ESM consumers when it's just the CJS consumers who are potentially going to have issues. So threw together the PR, and it's had a lot of negative response. So it doesn't look like it's something that's going to go forward. But the idea was that we could just disable it and disable encapsulation for CommonJS only. So you'd still get the full encapsulation. You wouldn't be able to import subpaths of packages from ES module import. But if you do require, it could still work. I wonder if there's a way to soften that even further, maybe make it another type of opt-out, because I guess the problem is that the opt-out is opting out for both CommonJS and ES modules. Maybe we could encourage an opt-out pattern like that only works for require. I'm just posting something in the chat here. Something like that in conditional exports. If we tell people how to use conditional exports and we say, this is your opt-out, that might be a better path, because the worry is that people then aren't getting encapsulation or they're all adding this opt-out. and then we lose those benefits of exports.
So I see, Guy, you added this like / require / Does that work?
Yeah, that's conditional exports.
Yeah, so it is possible that people can do that to just turn it off only for common JS, especially if they want to maintain like a Semver minor update.
Yeah, maybe we need to document that.
Okay. I think personally, I think documenting that, as well as with kind of like some stern warnings about like why these are not great patterns, like they should be added as like an interstitial step before a Semver major, as opposed to like a pattern you constantly rely on. I agree with a lot of the sentiment in that thread that keeping the behavior the same between CJS and ESM is important. And Wes, the particular case that came up was that Preact attempted to just document their specific exports, but then forgot to include package JSON, which broke things. So I sent a PR specifically to add package JSON. And after a discussion with Jason Miller, he added the / binding specifically in case there were any other edge cases they were unaware of. So it was meant to be like a catch-all with the intention of removing it in a Semver major. So, you know, I think that it is not the most desirable, but I think it's reasonable. And I think this additional scoping it just for require makes it even better, in my opinion. Jan, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I think one of my concerns with scoping to require is that works as long as none of the existing tools add support for imports, basically. Because right now, scoping it to require works because we assume that all existing consumers are using require, which is to some degree fair, but as soon as Webpack and others are adding support for the field, then there might be suddenly plenty of consumers that are not using require because they're using import syntax and all the bundlers are still looking at exports. So I think medium term, I don't think that opt-out specifically for require will actually fix the problem of breaking existing consumers.
Yeah, I would even go further and say like it's really weird to like have it inconsistent. But oh, sorry, Corey, you have your hand up.
I just wanted to mention that the using the conditional export in that way would basically cause CJS to produce the experimental warning. So that could be undesirable.
I think if you used, yeah, I see what you're saying there. It's a good point. But yeah, let me think about that more. But either way, I think like in both of these cases, if people are using exports and they export the dot, I don't think that they'll get the warning though, because we don't have the warning on just exports. The warning is only on conditional.
Yes, but the require is the conditional export. So using that pattern to essentially export dot to CJS but not to import would cause the warning for CJS consumers.
Guy, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I just wanted to see what the temperature was like on considering removing the warning if we started moving on that PR.
I'm happy with where we landed on the warning right now. And honestly, like this particular edge case of exposing a dot only for require and making it inconsistent between an ESM consumer and a common JS consumer in like a very specific weird way. Like it's still an experimental feature. Like I'm personally fine with the warning being the way it is right now. And I personally don't see a problem with folks who want to, in a Semver minor, have this escape hatch using it personally.
Sorry, can you, for the notes, clarify? That's the warning for conditional export specifically, right?
Yes. So to be clear, I personally am potentially even thinking that just doing the /export broadly for both ESM and CommonJS should potentially be the preferred pattern, because it feels weird to me to be treating one of the consumers differently so broadly. And I understand that it could be a way of like adding ESM support as a Semver minor and like keeping it more restricted for ESM while not making it restricted for common. But it seems like it's a really easy way to confuse consumers. And in retrospect, I'm thinking maybe we don't even want to document that, but I think we can maybe talk about that offline in a documentation PR if people feel strongly about it. And to what Wes said there, I think like people should really consider that adding exports can be breaking unless you opt out of some of this stuff. And that last bit is my editorialization. Jeffrey, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I feel like I kind of agree with Wes. Like, I feel like Preact solved their immediate problem, is that they had legacy consumers who expect non-encapsulation, and so then they disabled encapsulation. I'm not sure we really should be encouraging them to like to throw on encapsulation, but only for import consumers. Like, whenever they add encapsulation, that should just be their breaking change, and they should roll with it at that point. Like, I'm not sure anything needs to change, you know.
Guy?
Yeah, just bringing it back to the thought on flagging, just makes me think actually what Preact ships in its package.json is conditional exports with entries for import and require. So they will actually be getting the warning for their consumers anyway at this point. And
they probably were not intending to do that, and we should probably suggest that they use default for the CJS entry point.
Right, but what I'm saying is, I know I've heard you think it should stay in an experimental status, but I was hoping to hear from some other members as well. You know, keeping conditional exports and self-resolve in experimental, but removing those warnings to allow adoption without these frictions. What people think about that?
Jan, and then I'm gonna throw my hand up afterwards.
I should have thought about this before I started writing. So what do people think about removing the warning? Kind of coming back to the above. And I think I'm saying the same thing as I said last time the question came up, which is I think the warning for conditional export specifically is too easy to get wrong by accident, that you accidentally trigger it. So I think it would be a much nicer experience for people if they don't have the warning. Like, for example, what Miles just said with, oh yeah, we should advise them that they need to use a specific form of conditional export so that they can trick the warning system to not warn, even though technically they do have conditional exports in there, but it's just not triggering them. It seems very hacky to suggest people to do that just because we want to have the warning for what seems to me like intellectual purity at that point.
Guy?
Sorry, I actually left my hand up there. I think Jeffrey's next.
Okay, and then I'll go after Jeffrey.
I think we talked about this at a previous meeting, and I think what we were, I don't know if we reached consensus, but I think a suggestion that several people liked was we wanted the warning to somehow only be shown to the package author, but not the package consumer. And I don't know where we went with that. I was just thinking, right now that like we could, I mean, this is perhaps a little too hacky, I don't know, but like there are those extra fields that the npm registry adds onto package.json. So we could maybe like when someone does when there's a require or import of a package, if it has those extra automatically added fields, don't show the warning because you're assuming at that point that it's an end consumer. But if those fields are missing, then show the warning because you're assuming it's the author. And then we get a little bit of the best of both worlds, you know?
So kind of two thoughts here. The encapsulating the warnings only to the package authors is definitely an avenue that we can go by. I think that, and I could be wrong, you know, like we're seeing even just in our backport to 12, like this stuff is still experimental. We're still finding bugs in it. It's still not, in my personal opinion, production ready. Like the warnings, albeit annoying, are also kind of like doing their job. Like people are seeing them, they're reporting them. We're seeing what the usage is. There are opportunities that people can have to like get rid of the warning if they don't want it. And I understand that it's like to the point I think it was Yanni said, intellectual purity. I do understand where it's coming from there. But like, you know, default is not using conditional exports. So yeah, I guess that's kind of like a very specific reading of it. But perhaps what we could do that could be very useful would be sit down and maybe make a commitment to timing to removing the flags altogether, and removing the warnings altogether for certain things. So we have a couple different specific warnings, which could be rolled into the one very specific warning. So like we have the ECMAScript modules as experimental warning. And like we could decide that like, hey, in like a month or two, we just want to remove altogether the conditional exports warning instead of kind of the different things that we're thinking about. Anyways, shorter version is maybe what would be useful would be for us to sit down and come up with an explicit timing of where we're okay with removing the warnings. And then if we wanted to do shorter term engineering backflips for like specific encapsulation in the meantime, we can, but it might be reasonable for us to figure out how much longer those warnings will be there first before we kind of do some engineering effort on that. Jan?
Quick time check. I think we have 5 minutes left if we have it until 12:30, right?
We have it until 1. The TSC canceled.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Does anyone have a concern with like the kicking off an issue to discuss timelines on warnings, discussing that in the next meeting, and then trying to like in the next meeting come up with an action plan for warnings? We can also come up with a
does it
straw
need so much
proposal.
ceremony? Could we just talk about it now?
Yeah, we can. It's just we have other things on the agenda. So
Oh, okay.
like, how about this? How about we put a bookmark in this because it's taken a lot of our time. We're aware of the problem space. Let's try to blast through the other things that are on the agenda so that like we're good. And then if we have remaining time, spend it all on this issue. People okay with that?
Sure.
Okay. We have refine and unify exports resolution error handling. I think this one is Guy. That was just an assumption. It was a correct assumption. Guy, do you want to take this one?
Are my titles that obvious? Yeah, so oh gosh, I should have actually read through this. I just put together this mammoth block of text for the PR 31625. It's very simple, I promise. Let me just try and remember it all quickly. Right, so oh gosh, this is really not summarized. It's terribly written. So the main thing that I was kind of tackling with this, the main problem, was if you've got the PR up and you're looking at it, it's in the middle, there's the number 1 and 2, and it's the example in the middle of the paragraph of number 1, which is this fact that if you've got, because we've made exports conditions behave logically like if statements, so they kind of fall through from top to bottom. And if you have a nested condition, so you have a condition inside a condition, and in the nested condition, you then have something that's invalid. So it's not a valid internal path in the package. It's not a valid mapping. Then instead of getting an error, so say someone's written a typo or something like that, it'll still fall back through to the next attempted import. And the justification originally was that these are just fallbacks, but like a very fundamental idea in programming is that you want to get errors for things that are bad, because it's the package author that's going to be writing this the first time. And like the magical just work out and make things work path is generally a bad idea, because it means you can't trace what logic is really going on. You get these complex things happening. And array fallbacks are slightly different because they're designed, like users know that this is what they're opting into. But when it comes to conditional fallbacks, it's a slightly different picture, because if something doesn't catch when the author expects it to, they should get an error. It's like that programming principle is like, you should get an error when you've made a mistake, sort of thing, to know that this is not a correct mapping, and not just sort of, oh, it could have fallen through to some other option further down the conditionals. So the gist of the PR is splitting up the resolution errors into 2 main different cases: error invalid package target and error invalid module specifier. Sorry, error package path not exported and error invalid package target. So in the one hand, if the package target is invalid, it immediately throws. Whereas if there's no package target, so like that example that I pasted earlier in the chat, where there was just a require, but there wasn't anything else. So it would not match anything, but it was still a conditional object. There was a path present, but it doesn't match anything. And so that would give the error package path not exported. So the idea was just try to like reify some of these conditions into their general cases. And I really went through quite thoroughly and kind of sorted through. So there's the standard module not found is split up to error invalid package target, error invalid module specifier, and error package path not exported, which are the encapsulation errors or the fallbacks when nothing was found through all the fallbacks. And then the logic is used internally to make sure that in conditional exports, we always we fall back if the path, if there was no conditional match, it'll act like a fallback. But if there's an invalid thing on the right-hand side and it matches, it'll throw. It won't just go through to the next unless it's an array fallback. Sorry, it's quite a complicated one to explain, but that's the gist of it. Maybe if anyone has any questions, that could help clarify some of the details.
Wes?
So like, this is mostly a question from like an ideal / purity perspective. So having a specific error for when like the module exists, but it doesn't, it's not like visible because it's not in the export mapping. That exposes that the underlying module exists, which you could in turn take a dependency on in theory.
So it doesn't, that is not an error. The error package path not exported would that is your encapsulation error, and it just tells you that exports did not expose this, or
Right.
it only yeah.
So like, is that error different from like could not find the thing in the export map at all?
No. So if it cannot find it in the export map at all, it'll be error package path not exported. If it finds it in the export map, but it doesn't match any conditions, then it'll also be error package path not exported because it didn't match any of the known conditions. So that's the kind of thinking there. If it did match a condition, but it was to an invalid path, then it'll be error invalid package target.
Okay, and there's nothing special for if it matches an export if it does not match an export condition but does match a path on disk had we not resolved through exports.
Yeah, so this exposes nothing about the underlying file system. It's only based on the contents of exports and the right-hand side values of exports without touching the file system.
Okay, that's all I was concerned about.
And do you have any feedback about this API concept of splitting up the errors from this sort of singular module not found error into these slightly more descriptive errors? I think I've tried to do the best classification I can of the error space, kind of thinking in terms of, you know, error invalid module specifier if it's the user importing something invalid in the package. Error package path not exported when it's the exports config itself that's invalid or missing, or error invalid package target if the exports map to something invalid.
I mean, so like my personal opinion is that people shouldn't take a dependency on the exact and specific errors that something throws, because I, as a developer, would very much like to have the liberty to change or improve those errors in the future. Ergo, I do not like the idea of including my error surface in my public API.
Unfortunately, Wes, for the Node project, that's a non-negotiable.
Yeah, exactly. And so this is one of those things where, like, if you do want to do that breakdown, you have to make sure it's the final breakdown you want to do, because you won't be able to improve it again after things become unexperimental, right?
Right.
Yeah, so that's one of the things that we get. Now, for what it's worth, we can remove the flag, we can remove the warning, and still not promote the API to being considered stable. The other thing we can also do is, like, the error codes and the error message are also super flexible. Like, the error code is not flexible, but the message is, which is part of the reasons why we abstracted those. So what is actually more important than even the messaging is ensuring that the things that are erroring, that are sharing codes, share the same semantic, like high level semantics, like they want to share the same basic error, because we can actively change the error message, just not the code.
So another thing, I mean, if we were against this idea of separating out and having these separate codes, we could try and still keep the singular module not found, but we already do have two other codes happening. I think they are, where is it here? I can't see where I've written it out, but I think it's error invalid specifier. I think we have added for invalid package names because it simply isn't a module not found error. And I think for invalid URLs, there might be error invalid as a URL or something like that. So we do have these errors.
I think that the real question is, like, do you expect people to programmatically switch behaviors based on the different error code, right? Like, is that error code different because, like, that is intentionally something that you want people to switch on? Because, like, if you think people want to do it, then you want to provide a different error code for them to switch on. If you don't think people are going to do it, well, you can just have a different message, because the message is all they're going to read, right?
So there is another thing there, which is in Node.js, generally the way the error system is set up is that the error code and message kind of go together. So if we decided to, we could stick with a single module not found code and then split that code on lots of different messages. It just wasn't the way that naturally fell into it there is also a way in which one of the codes is being used internally for these object fallbacks. So it was the natural way to kind of do it. I've tried to design it as clearly as possible to indicate the different classes of what these errors are. So I think they will be useful to users, and I don't foresee that these are going to be something we're going to be having problems with in terms of as they expand in future to more sets of resolution cases. But I'm open to suggestions along these lines.
I think it's mostly a matter of your intent. If you want people to be able, if you want people programmatically in their code to switch on these different error classes, then you want to have different error classes. If you think that people really shouldn't be doing things programmatically based on these error codes, then maybe having only one error code is the way to go to try and discourage people from switching on the error code.
May I get in here? I agree, and for me, one of the reasons for having these additional error codes is potentially less that we want people to switch on these error codes, and more that given that people are already switching on module not found, we don't want these new cases to hit that. Because the usual way that they're using it is they catch module not found as a proxy for this optional dependency is not installed. If that catches, I'm trying to get a subpath of the dependency, I have a programming error, basically, that is not exported, that, in my opinion, would be bad. So I think that not having these included in the thing that is already in use to be a proxy of optional dependency is missing is good. And I think in that sense, I would want people to switch on it. Just like, for example, switching, being able to distinguish, in other words, being able to prevent people from catching accidentally something that is a misconfiguration in their dependency as, hey, this path is not supported by this version of my dependency. I think it makes it a lot clearer, and it breaks the code that should be breaking to have different error codes in these cases.
Jeff? And then if people are okay with it, I'd want to time box this discussion to 5 more minutes.
I just wanted to say, I feel like error messages should just be designed to function, to achieve their intended function, which is to inform the developer what's wrong in as clear and concise a way as possible so that they know what to fix. The idea that we wouldn't want more informative error messages because we don't want to let people switch on them, that's just, I mean, I see where you're coming from, but I feel like it's kind of crazy. I
mean, the message versus the code are two separate things. Making the message as specific as possible for every situation, always great. It's just the code is explicitly something that's for programmatic consumption, right?
I mean, yes and no. You could just as easily switch on the message. So I don't know. They should just both be informative and specific and detailed, I feel like. And it's not really our business to worry about what people might do with that information.
Yeah, I thought Jan made a very good point actually about, sorry, not actually, it was an excellent point, but the detection of optional dependencies, you typically don't want to catch things that are unrelated to if it was an actual error that has to do with the resolution of the package itself, as opposed to it just not being installed. And this does also open up the door to detecting encapsulation errors. So for example, if I wanted to do, a lot of this stuff is also thinking about how import.meta.resolve behaves, because these errors also come out of that function. And if you're using import.meta.resolve to resolve an export that's not exported, say, like say in that preact case where you want to check the package JSON, you could catch the resolved error and see that it's error package path not exported, and know that that error code is always means that you've hit an encapsulation error. And then you have a fallback in that encapsulation case that you can say, okay, I need to resolve the path to the package first, and then resolve the file from there inside the package, and then use fs or whatever. So I think the idea of having an encapsulation error seems quite nice to me as well.
Comfortable or like you need support, please see me. I will help.
Sorry. Are we ready for the next topic now?
I think so.
Yeah, so I just wanted to check, does anyone object to landing this or have any further feedback before we go?
No, it just means that we have to like it and, you know, decide it's what we want to go with in terms of the structure of the error messages, right? And it seems okay.
If you have any more time to take a look at it in more detail, please do. It would be great to get your feedback on it.
Great, thanks. So the next one we've got on here is move ESM workers to a worker.
Quickly for the notes, that was no objections, right?
To discuss, does anybody have anything specific they want to add to that? Cool, then I think we can skip it. Might even make sense to remove it from the agenda for now. So next one we have on here is number 475, which is docs review of various effects of type field. This is another one from Brad. There hasn't been a comment in there in like 26 days. I don't know if there's really any specific discussion to have about this one. Does anyone have anything specific that they'd like to discuss on this?
I think it's more of a to-do that like we need to add this to the docs.
Okay, should we drop the modules agenda for right now, or should we keep it as a reminder?
I mean, if we had a tag that was like need to do or something, that would be better, but yeah, I'm not sure it needs to be on the agenda.
We have a help wanted tab,
Sure.
and we have a just double checking to see if there's anything else that we should. Okay, yeah, I put the help wanted tab. I'm removing the modules agenda, and I'll document it. So the next one that we've got on here is the unflagging 12 and LTS thread. We updated we backported all the stuff to 12.x. That went up this week. We broke some stuff. We discussed that. We'll maybe have time to discuss some stuff some more later. I think we can, for now, drop this from the agenda and bring it back to the agenda in April or close to April when we're getting ready. Or would people like to keep this on the agenda for ongoing updates?
I'm fine with dropping it from the agenda. I just have one question, is that isn't April when we're also going to release 14.0.0?
Yep.
And then how would that correspond to unflagging stuff? Like, are we going to want to have everything unflagged in 14, or do we specifically want to have things flagged in 14?
Things are unflagged in 13. We wouldn't be reflagging them for 14.
No, I mean the things that are, or sorry, the things that are still experiment, or the things that are doing the warnings.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's a separate topic though, about whether or not
Okay.
we want warnings in 14, and I think that was the topic we were talking about bringing up. I think 14 might be a reasonable time to remove the warnings. We can also remove the warnings before LTS, and we can also remove the warnings during LTS. So these are all things that are flexible.
So in other words, it doesn't need to correlate with like 0.0.0.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, that's fine. Okay.
Okay, so I've removed that from the agenda. Next thing we have on here is chartering the modules team. You know, I think we're continuing to work fine without moving forward with this immediately. We do have the majority of things in place that we would need if we wanted to request being chartered. So I'm kind of, you know, feels like kind of we're in a bit of a holding pattern here. Does anyone have any specific feelings about the chartering?
I think we were just waiting until everything was unflagged, but I think it is now. So maybe we should just move forward with this.
Okay, so I guess what we could do, because I don't know if we have quorum on the call right now. Don't think, maybe we do. 1, 2, 3, 4. It's close. I think we need one more for quorum, but I can't remember exactly how many members we have. Thanks, Wes. So, I think that maybe we just put something in the issue, and you know, if no one objects, then the next week we can make a request to the TSC to charter the group. How do people feel about that?
Sure.
Cool. Next one we have on here is loader hook.
I could say something to that.
Go for it.
So I shipped what I needed. I know both Guy and Bradley had designs or had ideas of doing a redesign, but I haven't really heard anything since. So I wonder, I know the most specific thing I remember hearing was wanting to make these, what's the phrase? Not recursive, but where you register, like if you register multiple like resolve hooks, one runs and then like returns its result to your other registered hook, which returns it to the next registered hook, and so on. But I don't know if anyone's working on that or plans to work on that. I don't know what any other, you know, intended design changes or redesigns that anybody wanted. But I feel like if we're gonna do kind of dramatic changes to this, we should kind of do it sooner than later. So, or at least put an issue up that says like, yeah, these are the broad changes I want to make, so we could start discussing it. Because otherwise we're going to kind of end up with what we have now kind of by de facto. So I guess if we don't have Bradley, Guy, is that accurate to sum up your thinking, or can you add anything to it?
Yeah, I mean, it's worth considering. We should, if we want to think along those lines, maybe we should consider if the APIs that we want would be breaking or anything like that, or you know, what design space we want to keep open. I'm not sure actually. I mean, if someone's interested in driving it, it sounds like it could be done. Yeah, I suppose we should maybe go back to use cases and think about where the need is, and if this is something that I mean, ideally we would have users asking us for these features, and then it could be sort of driven by user interest. I don't know how much feedback we've had from user-line loaders so far. Do we know how that's going, and how much people are wanting loader composition at this point?
Yeah, there's that. There's oh, the other big change was moving it off thread. Thank you, Wes. And then that was, I think, the work in progress PR that Bradley had started. The only other thing I could think of that had come up was the whole WASM thing and the extensionless files. We were talking about maybe not inside Node Core, but if we wanted to provide a way to do source detection in order to get the type. Right now the hooks are kind of in a set order where you have to define the format before you get the source, or you're getting the source twice, like once inside the get format hook and then again in the get source hook. And so it kind of works against like figuring out the format from the source, but it's not, I don't know if that's something we necessarily want to encourage. So there's like lots of little things like that where we need to like broaden our scope of what are the other use cases that people are going to use these things for, and is the current design painful in those, and do we need to make changes? So.
I think two things to add. The first one is one of the big side effects of moving it off thread is also dynamic instantiate no longer being possible. It's just not an API that is compatible with running the loader in another thread, in another isolate. And the second thing is that, speaking of getting format and then loading the source, HTTP loader is another example where that is very unfortunate, because you have to respond to a first function call to get the content type, but then you get a completely different API call that has no apparent connection to the first one to get the contents of the HTTP resource. So you need to either make the HTTP request twice, once for the headers, once for the body, or you need to somehow, in a safe manner that doesn't leak memory, keep the HTTP response around between two separate calls to two different functions. So I think combining get format and get source would be something that would make a lot of loaders less painful to write, in my opinion.
Yeah, or maybe combining them some of the time or something like that. Like have it be optional whether they're combined or not. Another thing would be like, could it be where if dynamic instantiate, if the user registers a hook for dynamic instantiate, then it all happens in the main thread. But if they don't, then we do this split out into worker threads stuff.
I would caution against that, because the worker thread stuff is already complex without having multiple ways in which the things can flow.
Yeah, I was afraid you'd say that.
Like, I'd much rather find ways to collapse stuff at this point than to make it even more complicated logic. Like, for example, the same for the get format, get source, calling them sometimes in some order and sometimes in another order. I have looked at the current get, especially around format, the different ways in which the format may or may not be provided and or overridden is really confusing right now already.
All right, so maybe why don't we start a thread with the specific use cases that are painful currently, and then we can talk about ways to improve it. The only thing I would add to what you just said is that the reason they're split into more atomic bits is specifically so that you don't need to like re-implement a whole lot of boilerplate. Like that was the problem I had with the old resolve. So I just want to override little bits and not huge swaths. So yeah, obviously then that makes this other complexity. So we need to, split the difference somehow. Anyway, I think that's it, Miles.
Yeah, I think the one thing I wanted to add is dynamic instantiate also means that we might need a new hook, and somebody would have to drive that. So far, we only know that people would not like us to remove dynamic instantiate unless there is something that you can run in the normal thread, in the main thread, to set up the globals. But we have nobody yet that actually signed up to do it.
I'd love to at least see an example of someone using that for that purpose, so I can understand what the real use case is.
Just think of a
well, I mean, I know ideas of things that use globals like Mocha and stuff, but I mean like specifically someone using this hook for that purpose.
Think of New Relic. New Relic wants to have a single thing that they do, and then they want to both intercept third-party modules, but they also want to override HTTP.request. They cannot override HTTP request from a loader that runs in a different thread. They need to run some code for that for the built-ins on the main thread.
Okay.
So we've only got 3 minutes left and we still have one more agenda item on patch instrument to module. I guess a question for you, is this patch instrument module issue that we've got,
Isn't that what
able
Jan was
to
just
be
talking about?
disclosed by the prior conversation we were just having, or are these like unique enough?
I think that is what Jan was just talking about.
Okay. But I guess what I'm asking is, like, is patch instrument a module unique enough from loader hooks? Is it like a specific hook that we're talking about to do that functionality?
I think that
Most likely.
really, I think that issue was just opened like a year or two ago, long before we had the hooks kind of fleshed out. And so now that the hooks are kind of closer to being able to achieve it, we can kind of talk about it in the context of the hooks, but I don't think it's a whole separate like feature and stuff, is it?
In the discussions with Bradley about the loader, when it comes to patching core modules and having custom ways of doing stuff like this for the ESM representations of these modules and the ESM exports, I guess actually we already did that, didn't we? But patching modules is something that has to be considered from a loader perspective as well.
I think given the previous discussion around use cases, this issue seems to be one set of use cases that we would have to consider when we collect use cases for loaders if we want to support.
So for the sake of time, because we only have 1 minute left, the reason I was asking was more specifically, like, should we remove the agenda item from patch instrument to module and simply keep the loader hooks agenda item, or should we keep both agenda items as separate points?
I would roll it into the loader hooks.
Okay. Excuse me, I'll keep them as separate issues, but I'm just removing it from the agenda.
Wes has his hand raised.
Wes?
I think they're a little different insofar as when we're talking about loader hooks, we have like a concrete design and goals that we're like working forward to. But when we talk about like the patching and instrumenting a module use cases, we don't have any concrete proposals for what we're going to do to enable it yet. Like we don't have anything, like we don't have a proposal. We've got nothing.
Okay.
Well, that's why I brought up Bradley's spec work there, because there were large sections of that devoted to how to patch modules, and a lot of it was the threaded loaders.
Quick point of order. So sorry, we're at time. Wes, would you like me to keep the agenda label on there for now then?
I mean, probably. I mean,
okay,
cool. I feel like it's distinct enough.
Then that's all that matters for today, and we can revisit that the next time that we talk about it. Sorry for interrupting everyone, but we have a pretty hard cut. So with that, we did not get time to get to discussing removing of warnings. Does anyone want to take the action item of kicking off an issue to discuss that?
I'll open up an issue.
Thank you, Guy. And Wes, thanks for chiming in there. I will make sure, because this one has ended up at the bottom of the agenda a couple times. Let's restructure the agenda for the next meeting so that we actually discuss it. Cool, then that's that. I'm gonna stop the stream. Thanks everyone for